Yo, 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 we're here. It's another week, another video, another live stream, another day with your boy, Trey. For three! It's me. What's up, everybody? As the title down bottom there suggests, this here is very self-explanatorily a 2023 off-season review of the 2023 offseason for the Baltimore Ravens. So we're here today to discuss exactly what the Ravens have done this offseason. Just to take a quick look at it, starting at the top, I mean, the Ravens, they essentially had three main points of focus coming into the season, coming into the offseason, and they all happen to be on the offensive side of the ball as well. Those three things were first and foremost, perhaps foremost, the re-signing of Lamar Jackson, the quarterback, to a long-term deal. Secondly, would have been to make improvements on what was a now stagnant offense underneath Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator. And thirdly, to make improvements to their wide receiver core. Those are the three main focuses of this offseason. Starting with the first one, the re-signing of Lamar Jackson to a long-term deal. That move wasn't just an offensive move. It really was like a cornerstone, crucial, foundational decision and negotiation, one that was going to be set to affect the Ravens and determine the trajectory of their franchise over the next 5 years or so. Initially, the Ravens had placed a non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. What that means is that Lamar was able to talk to and negotiate contracts with other teams. But if he were to have found a situation in a contract with a team that he liked, the Ravens still held the right to essentially right of first refusal, kinda. Basically, they held the right to match that offer from whatever that other team was. And if they couldn't or did not want to match that offer, then they would be awarded the next two first-round picks from that team. So it was a decision that was met with a decent amount of criticism, especially in the media, more so in the media than anywhere else, but among the fans too. Didn't hear too much about it. You'll notice, and this is pretty telling. Usually it's always telling, but you'll notice that you didn't actually hear too much criticism about the move from other general managers, head coaches, and higher ups around the league. If you were hearing about those kind of talks in the league, it was mainly coming from the players saying that Lamar deserves to be treated better, kind of thing. But we all know the NFL is a business, one of the biggest out there. Even if it's an entertainment business, it's still a business. And the Ravens definitely have a business model that they usually like to stick to. But the idea with that particular decision was one that essentially they were under the belief that no team would be willing to break the bank and commit and tie up so much money to one player and Lamar Jackson to reach a contract agreement with him, but also to give up their two first-round picks on top of that big monetary commitment to give to the Ravens, since the Ravens had signed him to that non-exclusive franchise tag. So all in all, you're asking to pay a quarterback $250+ million and give up two picks for his services. That's a lot to ask. And the reason it's a lot to ask is typically just due to the fact that, I mean, making such a decision could, in a very real sense, potentially destabilize your entire franchise, and not even maybe just for the next 5 years, like I was mentioning for the Ravens. It could have long-term ramifications to the success and prosperity of your franchise. Not saying that of course, it wasn't given that that would be the case. If so, it wouldn't even have been a discussion to begin with, but it's a real possibility for sure. The Ravens were ultimately right with that on that gamble, though, as even the quarterback needy teams like Atlanta weren't interested in or able to play ball in that kind of scenario. It just wasn't realistic for the vast majority of the other 31 teams. What that meant, though, is that the Ravens were able to come to an agreement on a long-term deal with Lamar themselves. Though the timely contract extension of Super Bowl runner-up Jalen Hurts by the Eagles, I believe just maybe a few weeks, if that, prior to Lamar signing his extension, I definitely think that contract and its setup helped move things along. Ultimately, though, Lamar Jackson ended that contract saga by signing an at the time with the Baltimore Ravens, which included $185 million in total guarantees. Then there was the second point of business, and this is one that some fans have been calling on for quite some time. Myself was amongst them since at least the season prior. But the second was to make improvement on, like I said, that now stagnant offense that was mainly the fault of Greg Roman, former offensive coordinator, while they had gotten to that point. And so the main avenue in which they decided to improve that stagnant offense was by parting ways with Greg Roman and hiring as his replacement former University of Georgia offensive coordinator and back-to-back national champion Todd Monken. It was time, and like I said, according to some people, it was past time for the Ravens to make that move and move on from Greg Roman, which they did finally. He had done a pretty good job creating this run first offense that was both unique and capable of getting Lamar Jackson acclimated to the NFL without much of a steep learning curve or with as few growing pains as possible. But that offense seemingly had hit a wall. Like I said, it was largely Greg Roman's fault, and in my opinion, it was largely due to his inability to add complex and intricate pass concepts and route trees, variations to the route tree into his offense. That was the main thing. When he did implement passes and pass concepts, they were just too vanilla, too easy to read, too easy to defend. That was the biggest issue. The passes were too predictable, both when they were coming and then how they were coming. So that just was what it was. Monken, on the other hand, was one of the top two guys that I personally felt like was a dream hire. I was personally stuck between two choices of who I wanted to be the Ravens' next offensive coordinator. First of which was Todd Monken, in no particular order. It was Todd Monken. And the second one was Eric Bieniemy, who's now the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, but was the former offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. It was a bit of a toss-up for me, given that I wasn't exactly sure how much of Kansas City's offense and their success was actually credited to Eric Bieniemy. And I also couldn't be sure if the success of Todd Monken at the University of Georgia as a back-to-back champ would transfer back to the NFL and to the Ravens. But given the type of success that he had both there and during his last time in the league with the Cleveland Browns during Odell Beckham's last 1,000-yard receiving season, ironically, and also prior to that on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as their offensive coordinator with Jameis Winston, who he had, I believe he was either leading the league in receiving yards or receiving touchdowns that year. But definitely Monken has a bit of a track record for success. And given all that, I liked his chances of taking what would be the best quarterback he's ever coached and taking him to the next level and elevating his game as a passer. So I'm fairly confident in that. I think that I made me a bit more confident in that versus the question marks that were around Eric Bieniemy as far as his involvement in the success of the teams that he has been on up until that point. So all in all, I am satisfied with the Monken hire for now, but let's see how the season goes. The last point of focus for the Ravens this offseason was the improvement of their wide receiver core. Their wide receiver room had been a hot topic over the last few seasons as far as its lackluster appearance and inability to stack up against other top receiving cores, as well as its overall lack of production. The first step to improving that receiving core came even before Lamar Jackson himself was re-signed, and that was with the signing of superstar receiver Odell Beckham Jr. to a one-year deal worth up to $18 million, which was much more than he had been offered by any other team up until that point in this past offseason. They also signed former first-round receiver Nelson Aguilar and another one in Laquan Trotwell, though Laquan Trotwell ended up not making the 53-man roster and ended up signing to the practice squad, though, so he's currently on the Ravens practice squad. Then with this was very interesting because going into draft night, the Ravens still had a very real need for wide receiver because Odell Beckham, though nice in name, there was still a lot of question marks given that he's coming off of an ACL tear and nearly age 30 season. There's a lot of questions. So there was still need for wide receiver going into the draft. There was certainly still a need for cornerback because Marcus Peters had left in free agency, hadn't yet been re-signed. Marlon Humphrey was far and away the best cornerback on the roster, and at the time, the second best cornerback was looking like Brandon Stevens, who would play opposite of Marlon Humphrey. On top of that, edge rusher was also still a need. Justin Houston hadn't been re-signed. Calais Campbell moved on. You were looking at Dafe Owe, David Ajabo, Tyus Bowser, hopefully bouncing back well from an injury the season prior. But the depth, though not as bad as last year, but still looking somewhat questionable this year coming into the draft. So those are the three main places where the Ravens could have gone. People know that the Ravens, especially under Ozzie Newsome, but under Eric DeCosta as well, have typically gone with the best player available instead of chasing needs, especially when they feel like the best player at a need is nowhere near as good of a player as the best player currently available on the board. But with all that being said, all those option scenarios, caveats, different little things that could affect and swing things one way or another, the Ravens ended up going with their first round pick, Boston College wide receiver Zay Flowers. And ironically, he was a guy who was number 2 on my list of dream picks with that first pick. For me, number 1 on that list was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who ended up going to the Seattle Seahawks to begin the run on wide receivers that Zay Flowers was a part of in that draft. Jackson Smith was the first of 4 straight wide receivers selected, which was the most ever in NFL draft history for receivers selected in a row. JSN, as he's called, Jackson Smith-Njigba, he was a guy that I really wanted the Ravens to draft. But Zay Flowers was a somewhat close number 2, but he was certainly my number 2 option. If we couldn't get JSN, I wanted Zay Flowers. And what I've seen so far from Zay Flowers since then has left me very satisfied that we selected him with that pick, especially since JSN was there. But it could be that he ends up even having a better both year and career than JSN. So we will see. But I personally am satisfied with the pick. Ravens could have gone corner. I think, honestly speaking, had they gone corner, they may be in a better position right now than they are because of how seemingly deep their wide receiver room now is. They could have afforded to go with a later round receiver perhaps and go with a premier corner with their first round pick. But we'll see. That is still, the jury is still very much out on that and whether or not that will end up being a factor in their success or lack thereof this year. The Ravens also made a number of moves in the offseason that, while less publicized, should also have a fair impact on how the season goes. They made multiple changes to the coaching staff outside of hiring Todd Monken as the new offensive coordinator. Those moves include naming T. Martin as their new quarterbacks coach. T. Martin was either the pass game coordinator or the wide receiver coach prior to this season. They hired Willie Taggart, former head coach of Florida State University. They hired him as their new running backs coach. They parted ways with strength and conditioning coach Steve Saunders, who some may have seen received a lot of blame for the Ravens' rash of injuries over the last few seasons, both in the media and by former players themselves. But so he was replaced with an in-house promotion of Scott Elliott as the new head strength and conditioning coach. The Ravens hired Chuck Smith, a man who's known as Dr. Rush, a pass rush specialist, as their new outside linebacker coach to help get some production and the true potential out of their young pass rushers. And they hired Greg Lewis. Player personnel moves outside of those wide receiver additions I mentioned earlier. They also signed third string running back and special teamer Justice Hill to a 2-year contract extension. They signed backup quarterback Tyler Huntley to a restricted tender contract. They traded away starting safety Chuck Clark for an undisclosed draft pick at the time. I believe it was a 2024 seventh round pick. Very surprising that that's what they ended up settling on for trade compensation for a guy who had been a long time every down starter for them on defense. But ultimately, that's what they did. Chuck was looking for a fresh start. They gave it to him in the trade with the Jets. Unfortunately, though, Chuck Clark did suffer a season-ending injury after that and will not be playing in this upcoming season. The Ravens also signed cornerback Rock Ya-Sin to a 1-year deal, former cornerback for their Las Vegas, almost said Oakland, Las Vegas Raiders, who looks to be the starter opposite Marlon Humphrey, at least for the beginning of the season. Outside of that, they also declined starting linebacker Patrick Queen's 5th-year option, so he's now going into a contract year with a lot to prove. He'll either be getting a payday with the Ravens or somewhere else at the end of this season. They then drafted 5 other players in the 2023 draft outside of Zay Flowers. And then during training camp, signed guys like Ronald Darby, Jadeveon Clowney, and Melvin Gordon to fill some needs and some holes. Though Melvin Gordon was the only one of those 3 to not make the 53-man roster, he did sign on to the Ravens practice squad. That was pretty much the bulk of their offseason moves. Now the Ravens are ready to get this season started and see what it holds for them. Though they will have to start, at least for the first couple of games, perhaps without top defensive back, star cornerback Marlon Humphrey, who recently had surgery on his foot. Besides that, though, the main storylines going into the season are, of course, how well this new Todd Monken-led offense is going to look. How long will it take them to hit their stride? Can Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman, and Odell Beckham all remain healthy throughout the duration of the year? Will Odell reach some kind of pre-injury form? And how well will J.K. Dobbins, Patrick Queen, and other Ravens who are entering pivotal contract years play this season? Will they earn themselves big contracts here, elsewhere? Will that be during the season? Will they be shipped out before the trade deadline? Is this a postseason thing? Those will be storylines to watch. And then have the Ravens done enough to overtake the Cincinnati Bengals and once again name themselves kings of the AFC North? That's where the Ravens stand heading into this week, the first week of the 2023 NFL season. That's all I have for you today. That was my review. Don't forget to like this video if you like what you heard. Thanks for sticking around for this relatively brief live stream. It looks like I'm going to be going in just around 20 minutes here. But again, don't forget to like the video. Also, don't forget to comment, subscribe. I appreciate all the subscriptions. Comment, definitely, please do. Let me know what you thought about the Ravens offseason moves. Have they done enough? Do they need to do more? What more do they need to do? What are your overall feelings on it? And what do you think all those moves will amount to this upcoming season? Let me know all that and more in the comment section. I would love to hear so and discuss it with you guys. Again, thanks everybody for showing me love and supporting. I'll see you guys next time. It's your boy Trey for 3. Peace.